So, hi everybody, and welcome back to our next installment of our 10-minute FM lessons. Today, we are going to be talking about budget development, and you have the fortune of having a real expert. Jim Myers is going to be leading us in this one. So, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Alana. I'm glad every one of you is able to join us today. For those of you who don't know me, I have an engineering background and spent my entire career in facilities-related work. I retired in 2017, and now I'm using my skills and knowledge to help others in the profession. For 22 years, I was the director of the Penn State Facilities Engineering Institute. It's an organization that was dedicated to helping facilities with infrastructure and energy-related issues. And I managed a multi-million-dollar budget. And that's the topic of today's 10-minute session, budgets. Most of this, or if not all except my own stories, are based on the Pro FM content. And Alana and I teach a Pro FM class. We're starting a new one next month. And so this is just one small sliver of that content. Funding, of course, is really the lifeblood of any organization, and budgets exist so that you can plan, organize, track, and improve your financial situation. Another way to put it is that a budget is a spending plan based on the estimated income and expenses over a period of time. So this shows some concepts around budgeting that I want to discuss. Budgets really serve several purposes. The main purpose really is to determine how much various programs or projects will cost prior to spending the money, so that management really knows, first of all, how much money they need. It becomes a decision point, which could then be a go or no go for a program or a project, or a decision on a project scope change. Budgets serve as a baseline for measuring program performance. It's extremely critical to budget by program rather than have just one overall budget, because it allows individual programs to be assessed based on their separate costs and contributions. So, for example, in my role in my organization, I had approximately at the end about 11 different programs running at one time. And my thing was, I would tell people, look, each program has to stand on its own 2 feet. Program A can't subsidize program D. Now, obviously, at the end of a year, if you run into a little bit of a problem on something, you don't have a choice. But certainly going into a year, and for planning purposes, each program, each project needs to stand on its own, right? So this can help you, of course, in program development as also, and can help you in developing key performance indicators, as shown there in the bottom of the second box. Facility managers are also assessed partially based on budgeting. They're assessed on many factors, but adherence to budgets is an important factor. Being held accountable for the portion of the budgets under an individual's control is important to all organizations. It's really also kind of a unique thing in governments, and I'm going to mention governmental kinds of entities a couple of times, because in governmental agencies, profitability is not really a factor. So, public sector entities kind of have some unique features to them that play into budgets. The last box talks about being a motivating tool. This is to encourage both accurate estimating and management motivation as well. Some organizations ask for an expected budget, but may also set what are called stretch goals, possibly even tied to bonuses. Now, stretch goals might encourage facility managers to innovate, to cut costs, to provide better services at the same cost. It's a double-edged sword, however. The flip side of that is that there may be conflicting incentives when budgets are being prepared. And that's where the term there, sandbagging, comes in. You know, if I am preparing a budget and I know that I'm going to get a bonus if I beat my budget, and the people I'm submitting the budget to don't really know any better, I could overestimate that budget and beat it just to get the bonus. So certainly, you know, it's important to have people in the process that understand not just the one level, but various levels that are impacted here, so that things like the sandbagging can't occur. And on the other side of that, then a demoralizing can be if a stretch goal is too stretchy and not obtainable, that can be demoralizing. So this is a concept of showing bottom-up versus top-down budgeting. And kind of as I implied earlier, the process for budgeting needs to take into account what the facility manager can control directly versus elements that are outside of their control. Best practice is to include the people who will be managing a particular program to be part of that process. This does two things. One, the people closest to the program should have the best information on what's needed and what should lead to the best budget accuracy. And second, it gives the person a sense of ownership over the resulting budget. Buy-in is important. After all, you know, that person is the one that's going to have to make it work, and you need their commitment to make it work. And this slide is showing two approaches to that budget development, a bottom up and a top down. The bottom up, as the name implies, is one in which the operational managers develop the budgets for programs under their control. Then they're submitted to the next level up. This level of management then can aggregate the budgets for the managers under him or her until a final budget is reached and presented to top management as it goes up the levels. At each level, management level, the supervisor can and usually does provide some immediate feedback or will negotiate with subordinates to ensure that the organizational priorities and the overall constraints can be met. A bottom-up budget is likely to capture the daily operational requirements of the organization, but it can also result in costs that are maybe a little higher than what management had expected. A top-down budget is developed first at the level of senior management based on the overall objectives and costs of the organization as a whole. They then tell each responsible manager their expectation for the goals, and each level manager then negotiates or provides feedback as to the feasibility of achieving the goals given that level of funding. On the plus side, this process keeps in mind the strategic overall need for the organization, but it can then lack understanding of the actual costs at a detailed level. Both of these processes are iterative, starting out with a first draft and then proceeding to more and more detail, perhaps 2 or 3 iterations. In many cases, the first iteration may be a bottom up, and then a second iteration top down. But in real life, ideally, it is kind of a combination of both. It's not purely one or the other. So again, it may start as a bottom up and as a kind of a top down. I wanted to talk a little bit about this concept as well, what they're calling here conventional budgets versus zero-based budget. Conventional budget, and again, it's going to vary depending on your organization. But some people just take last year's budget and say, I'm going to add 4%, 5%. That's versus a zero-based budget, which, as it says, starts with a blank page, and you've got to put down everything you need. The previous slide talking about top down and bottom up is probably more conducive to a zero-based budget type of approach. I mentioned about governmental agencies. Governmental entities hate zero-based budgets. I worked with government for over 30 years. I was on a school board at one time. The thought of a zero-based budget to a governmental entity just drives them nuts. It's a good idea to zero-based budget in any organization, not necessarily every year, but certainly at least once every 3 to 5 years. Okay. Again, that previous bottom down, top up is more of a zero-based, but again, in a lot of organizations, it's not purely one thing or another. And I don't mean to beat on the governmental entities, but they have their challenges in that oftentimes they can't carry over money from one year to the next, and they end up hiding money and playing games with things, and zero-based budgets play with that kind of scenario. Very quickly, just a couple of other things. I know I'm running out of time here, but the budget components, again, highly dependent on your organization, what your components are. If you're a very heavily project-oriented organization, your capital budgets are probably going to be your biggest thing. My organization was a service organization. So the biggest, by far the biggest entity in my organization was salaries and benefits. So, you see administrative budgets. And then of course there are people budgets when you talk about custodial, grounds keeping, that sort of thing, unless that's all outsourced. Again, if you're a heavily O&M kind of organization, that O&M piece is going to be very big with your people, and again, perhaps outsourcing some of that. Other than people and projects, your other big cost is going to be utilities. So again, highly dependent on the type of organization, which of those things dominate. And finally, just the last thing here, some budget tools. So in a very, very small organization, you may just have a spreadsheet, or you might be using something like QuickBooks. But if you're in a big organization, you start ramping it up into specialized budget cloud-based software, incorporated into your CMMS systems, right? And in the biggest organization, you're going to have enterprise asset management, like maybe SAP. Boy, that makes some people cringe, doesn't it? The more complex you get, the more powerful it is, but you also lose some flexibility. Some people love those big systems, other people hate them. You've got to go with what works for your organization based on the type of organization and size of your organization. So that is it in really quick form. I think I ran over my 10 minutes, but I want to mention that we'll be back for some other 10-minute lessons next week. Alana will be doing the value of professional development and training. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to be doing a little session on what you need to do when you're presenting to executives. Alana, any other comments?
No, I'll just say it was sort of interesting. A lot of people were doing bottom up. So it sounds like was interesting. So you have some control over your budgeting process. So that's really nice to see. other than having zero money, and that everyone's doing zero base. But zero base is a really interesting concept. And I loved your suggestion of it's not an every year thing because it could be kind of painful to start from scratch, but certainly every couple of years to sort of make sure that you that your line items are still in line with the organization makes a ton of sense. I thought that was a really interesting point as well. Any questions from anyone before we finish up here and let you go about your day and the rest of your week? Well, if not, we will say thank you so much. And thank you, Jim. That was great. And look forward to seeing everyone next week. We're talking about training and professional development. Of course, near and dear to our hearts, but some things to think about for your own internal organizations. We're going to spend some time talking about that. And look forward to seeing everyone next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, Alana. Thanks, Jim.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.